The Dallas Stars keep on winning, the Boston Bruins keep on losing, and Sidney Crosby keeps doing Sidney Crosby things. We've got that and a lot more coming up on today's Locked On NHL podcast.
You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Happy Friday, everybody, and welcome to the Friday edition of the Locked On NHL podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I want to thank everyone who makes Locked On NHL your first listen every day. Don't forget to subscribe on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts so you get new episodes as soon as they drop. I'm Gil Martin of Locked On Islanders. I'm here every Friday with Rachel Donner of Locked On Flyers. Happy Friday, Rachel.
I would say it's a happy Friday, except we're about to talk about the Dallas Stars, who defeated my Philadelphia Flyers for that 6th win in a row. But it's all right, I guess.
Yeah, catching a team at the wrong time if you're a Flyers fan, no question about that. It's been timing is everything sometimes.
It truly is.
You mentioned the Dallas Stars. They are on a nice winning streak, and we've got our hosts there to talk about it. Here's what they had to say.
That second period in particular was just pure domination. The Stars were humming, all four lines getting in on the action, making things happen, just extended zone time one after another. I thought the Stars defense, in terms of their offensive ability with Miro Heiskanen, Thomas Harley, Dumba, Lyubushkin, some of the best we have seen from them this season as well. They were huge parts of that second period. You look at the puck possession at 5-on-5, 66% for the Dallas Stars. They ended up with 14 scoring chances at 5-on-5 in that second period. Flyers had 5, 14-5. Just pure domination in the middle period. Stars could have had more. They only ended up with 1 from Wyatt Johnston.
All right, that was Joey Erickson of Locked On Stars. And Rachel, I know that was not an easy game for you to have to sit through.
Listen, I kind of disagree with Joey about the Dallas Stars defense. They didn't have to do anything. The Flyers were non-existent offensively. I will give the Dallas Stars, especially their top 6 forwards, all the credit in the world. They are incredible to watch on the rush, especially. I was having a lot of fun, honestly, watching them streak down the ice, and they just have such great anticipation. But the Flyers were completely off kilter, could not connect on passes. They were trying too hard. It was just a mess offensively. So I do think Dumba had a very good game for them defensively. He stood out to me, but I think it was more the Flyers were terrible than the Dallas Stars defense was great. And I think also Samerson and net kind of saved the Flyers a little bit in that period in terms of the actual goal scoring, to his point. But there's no lack of credit to the Dallas Stars on this win streak overall. And you look at this streak and they've scored 4 more goals in 5 of those 6 wins.
Yeah. Very productive offensively, and they're just marching through the Eastern Conference right now. I mean, out of the last 5 games, 4 of them were against Eastern Conference opponents. And here is a team that they're getting some really solid goaltending from Jake Ottinger and from Casey DeSmith.
Which is absolutely bonkers to me, having watched Casey DeSmith forever and going back to, I saw him in the AHL countless times. And for him to be a solid NHL backup is still absolutely crazy to me. But he is.
Yeah, he's playing well, but having that strong team in front of him, no doubt, helping him out. And how about Roope Hintz? 19 goals, only 7 assists, so he's a Cy Young candidate, but 19 goals right now leading this team.
Yeah, it's interesting because, he is a huge part of it, absolutely, in terms of their season stats. You look at the 6-game win streak, and he and Jamie Benn are tied for 4 goals in those 6 games, which is pretty incredible. I would say almost say that second line, the Duchesne line with Ben and Wyatt Johnston have been like the determining factor here for them offensively. Duchesne has 3 goals and 5 assists for 8 points in there, and Jamie Benn also had that OT winner in that comeback game against the Rangers at Madison Square Garden. So I would like to give that Dallas second line a lot of credit, especially having watched them in person last night. I mean, they are just a joy to watch on the ice.
They are, and they're doing it with balance. Right now, 9 different players have 20 or more points, and 2 others have 19. So you're just getting balanced offense from up and down your lineup, and that depth is a big consideration when you're talking about a team because it makes you more slump proof. Because if 1 or 2 of your guys are slumping, you've got plenty of other guys who can contribute and pick up the slack.
Yeah, it's interesting because Stankoven, rookie, was supposed to kind of maybe compete for the Calder this year, and he's fallen off a little bit, but it doesn't matter for
Right.
Dallas. And
Yeah.
that's the point here, right? Is that like one of your top younger players, like they've got other younger players in the lineup as well. And I did think that fourth line actually played really well against the Flyers. I mean, again, it was a rough game for the Flyers, but I still think like that third line contributed a lot as well. And then I do think the Stars defense is good, despite me thinking it wasn't them that did it versus the Flyers. They've been a huge factor in this win streak as well. When you have Heiskanen on your top pairing and Lindell on your second pairing, like I think you're pretty much set there.
Yeah, you're in pretty good shape. And yet you look at the standings right now, and Dallas is in 3rd place in
Hmm.
the Central Division now. They've got a couple of games in hand
Yep.
on Minnesota and Winnipeg, who are 3 and 5 points ahead of them. But imagine that you go on a 6-game winning streak and you're actually, 3rd in your division still, and you're actually tied in points at least with Colorado, although the Avalanche have played 3 more games than the Stars right now.
Right. And their last loss was to the aforementioned Minnesota Wild, who are right above them in the standings. That was a 3-2 overtime win by the Wild. So even Dallas got a point out of that game, December 27th. So, Dallas keeps winning in 2025, I guess. But, to be within 5 points of the Jets right now, I think it's absolutely attainable for the Stars to catch them.
Oh yeah, I mean you got half a season left, so there's plenty of time. But the thing about the Stars that I think impresses me most is just their consistency.
Yeah.
Uh, this is just a team that because of their depth and because of the talent, they have the best penalty kill in the National Hockey League, and they're 2nd in the league in goals allowed. So you're just talking about a team that is built from the goal out, is very strong defensively, and is balanced offensively. So even though they're kind of in the middle of the league, 13th in goals scored, they're so effective. The only thing
Yeah.
that's really causing them to struggle right now is a 27th ranked power play, and that's surprising given all the talent they have in this lineup.
Yeah, I think so. And that's something that can absolutely kick into gear at any given moment, right? With teams like this, sometimes power plays are streaky and then all of a sudden they're scoring on almost every opportunity, right? So
Yep.
I think that this is a team that can absolutely do that. It is also interesting that in this streak, they've been on this road trip now, which they're continuing for 3 more games that they have coming out east, and they haven't been as good on the road this season as home. I believe they're at 10-8 on the road, which is good. Don't get me wrong, but it's not great, right? But they've managed to snag wins on the road consecutively to start off this road trip. And, it continues in Montreal on Saturday, who've been very good recently. Ottawa on Sunday, they've been struggling. So to have Ottawa on the second half of that back-to-back bodes well for the Stars, I think. And then they face the Leafs on Tuesday. That Leafs game on Tuesday, that's going to be a real barn burner.
That is some great hockey to look forward to. And boy, the Senators are struggling without Linus Ullmark. What a difference a goalie makes, right?
Absolutely.
All right, we have got a lot more to discuss. While the Dallas Stars are streaking, the Boston Bruins are looking for answers. They are on a 6-game losing streak. We'll talk about that next on today's Locked On NHL podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by your friends at FanDuel. From big upsets to game-winning drives, the NFL playoffs are better with FanDuel. Because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. The FanDuel app gives you everything you need for live bets, same-game parlays, and so much more. And it's not just the NFL playoffs. Hockey fans, use your knowledge of the game of hockey and your favorite team to find exciting opportunities on the FanDuel app. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today, and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com, FanDuel.com. Make this playoff season unforgettable with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the National Football League. So, the Boston Bruins hasn't been pretty lately. They got that little bump after the coaching change, and it didn't really last. Ian McLaren of Locked On Bruins has this on the latest Boston loss.
Not even their own moms in the arena can fix the Bruins on this night. This is Ian McLaren, host of Locked On Boston Bruins, and this team has now lost 6 games in a row after falling to the Lightning in Tampa Bay on Thursday. 7 of their last 8 coming out of the holiday break. And things aren't going to get much easier because they will now go to Southern Florida to take on the Panthers and then come home to take on these very same Lightning. At this point, their playoff spot is tenuous at best. There's plenty of teams below them in the standings that are making a charge here. The Bruins falling precipitously. And I just don't know. Don Sweeney needs to make a move here to shake up this roster, whether it's a call-up or a trade, before things get too bad.
Oh, boy. Things are not looking good in Boston. You could hear it in Ian's voice. And, across the board right now, Boston is struggling. They've scored exactly 1 goal in their last 2 games. That obviously is not going to win you a lot of games. And, they just can't seem to get out of their own way. 25th in goals scored, 27th in goals against, next to last on the power play, 25th on the penalty kill. And oh, by the way, they're the most penalized team in the National Hockey League. That equation doesn't add up to a lot of success.
No, and the last time the Boston Bruins lost 6 games in a row was in 2015. Like, it has been
10
a while
years ago. Yeah.
Yeah. And, in this 6-game losing streak, they've been outscored 24-11. They've only had the lead in like just over 10 minutes of that 6-game streak. And, I think it's one of those things where you talked about the bump with the coaching change. Like, when things aren't going well, you want to make a change. And sometimes the coach is the easiest change to make because it doesn't involve the salary cap and trades and all of that. You can just fire a guy, right? And hope that it ignites something in your team. And when you sort of promote from within in those situations, because you don't feel like there's an external candidate going to help things and you want some sort of consistency, but have that change. I do think that the bump isn't going to last as long. I really do, because like at a certain point, it's going to be a similar or same system that you've been working with the entire time. And so I don't like, there's going to be a lot of diminishing returns there. And I think that's what we're seeing to some degree with Boston.
And I think there's also a different dynamic. When you're the assistant coach, sometimes you're like the good cop. You're the guy that
Mhm.
the players come to when they're angry at the coach or they don't like something, and you go to the assistant coach and he's the player's guy. And all of a sudden, if you have to switch roles and go from being the good cop to the bad cop, so to speak, it doesn't always, the respect and the fear doesn't always translate when you have to switch roles. So sometimes you keep that continuity and it helps a team, but sometimes, as you alluded to, the change isn't enough and you don't get that big bump. But, I think the root of the problem right now for the Boston Bruins is just a lack of scoring depth. This is a
Yeah.
top heavy team.
It really is, and the only thing that's gonna change that is making a trade, and it's interesting because, from what I understand, there've been, "Fire Sweeney" chants in the crowd at Bruins games, which is not great if you're Don Sweeney,
No.
but I do think that, you know, if there's a lack of action or even like strong, credible trade rumors or some sort of indication that he's working the phones and trying to make something happen for this team, like that's when there's a lack of confidence from the fan base. And then conversely, when there is a lot of that going on, the team is nervous
Right.
about it.
Squeezing your
And
stick.
everybody, yeah, there's like a lot of things on edge. So I get that there's like pros and cons to being public about seeking trades, but like Trent Frederick has been on sort of the trade rumor block since the beginning of the season and was one of those guys that you said, "Oh yeah, trade deadline, the Bruins are going to deal Frederick."
Right,
He
right.
he has not had like the greatest selling season for him, but at the same time, like, oh, just do it, right?
At some point, yeah, at some point. And we're at the halfway mark. The Bruins, as Ian said, are falling toward the bottom of a very bottom heavy Eastern Conference right now.
Mhm.
If they don't get their act together, they will not make the playoffs because there are just so many teams bunched together. You've got to keep winning, or at least winning semi-consistently, to keep treading water in this messy middle of an Eastern Conference.
Yeah, and we were talking before we started recording the show today about how the NHL schedule is very lopsided in terms of, early on you tend to play the other conference or even the other divisions. Well, like once mid-January hits, there's a lot of in-division games, and Ian talked in that clip about having to go face the Panthers and the Lightning again. The Senators are after that, and they play the Senators again. And, there's a lot of in division and in conference games coming up for the Bruins. And if they can't rack up those points now, like that is it for them, essentially. And it could be over by Four Nations.
Yeah, and then the trade deadline for the Bruins would look completely different. How much do you think they miss Linus Olmark? Because Swayman's numbers and Korpisalo's numbers are pretty close to identical, and neither one of them are, above 900 save percentage or above or below a 2.8 goals against average. Both of them, it seems to be the team in front of them more than anything else that seems to be hampering their numbers.
Yeah, it's hard to play 2020 hindsight with the decision to keep Swayman over Allmark. I still think, given everything, if they made the decision that they could only keep one of them, and based on salary cap and everything, that seemed to be the case in Boston there, right? I still think Swayman's the guy you keep based on what you know at that time. I think that goaltending is very weird and changes a lot. And also, like, when a guy gets a change of scenery and has a different team in front of him, sometimes they play differently and sometimes they play better. And I think that's happened with Ullmark. Ullmark has been, I think the deciding factor for Ottawa because it shows when he's not in there for them.
Big
Um,
time.
Huge, right? So, I can't really fault the Bruins for doing what they did goaltending wise. I think a Swayman Corpusalo duo is pretty solid, but sometimes like the team in front of them are failing those goaltenders, and sometimes it's them.
Yeah. Yeah. And sometimes it's a combination of both.
Yep.
But right now, the Bruins are struggling mightily. Meanwhile, Sidney Crosby keeps on chugging along. We will talk about that coming up next on today's Locked On NHL podcast.
I love going to live events, whether it's sports, music, theater, or comedy. And one of my favorite things I went to recently was a Broadway show I'd been wanting to see for a while. And now Game Time has made it even easier to get those tickets for your favorite events with their new feature, Game Time Picks. This feature filters out the fluff to only show you those incredible deals on great seats. You don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. And recently, I was looking for tickets to Wicked on Broadway, which I have not seen in a while, but given the movie, I was interested in reminding myself how the show turns out in the end. So with Game Time Picks, I found amazing deals. Could even see the view from my seat before I picked my seat. The super deal was particularly impressive. It offers great seats at unbeatable prices. Plus, the app's all in pricing shows the total cost upfront, so there's no surprise fees at checkout. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem with the code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time.
So, Sidney Crosby, he just keeps rolling along. It's like this guy doesn't age. I mean,
I know.
he just keeps finding ways. He's better than a point a game player this year. 12 goals, 47 points in 43 games, and he makes a little history as he factors in on. He has a 3-point night and moves past Joe Sakic in the NHL's all-time point list. You're talking about some pretty elite company here.
Yeah, and here's the thing. Once again, we are both Metro Division people. We hate having to say good things about Sidney Crosby, but I feel like in this whole Alex Ovechkin race to the record, like I find myself saying, "But what about Sidney Crosby?"
Yeah.
a lot, a lot, and I feel like in some ways he's not getting his due as much as he should this season. And don't get me wrong, what Ovechkin has accomplished and maybe likely will accomplish is absolutely phenomenal. But I feel like Crosby has been the better all around player in the long run. And, obviously he has more points total than Ovechkin does simply because Crosby is also quite an excellent playmaker.
Yes.
And I think that when you talk about a guy who, when his current contract expires, will be 39 years old and is still playing at age 37 as an elite forward, like that, like how is he doing this?
Because he's Sidney Crosby. That's how.
I know.
I mean, he just keeps rolling along. And I think you also have to remember, and maybe it's not a fair comparison, but Crosby's won more cups than Ovechkin also.
Yeah. Yeah. And, but for Washington winning that lone Stanley Cup, I think the conversation might be very, very different. Now, it was an earned and deserved Stanley Cup. Like, don't get me wrong. But I think like Crosby just to me has epitomize like what it means to be a superstar in this league. And I think that obviously, the knock on him is that he's boring, and so they can't really use him, right, in terms of publicity as much as they would like to. But I think he's getting a little bit more cheeky as the years have gone on. But he just keeps doing his thing on the ice. It is interesting that the person above him on the all-time scoring list right now is Mario Lemieux.
Yeah, I was going to ask
And
you about that. And yeah, not going to catch him this year unless he
no,
gets 80 points in half a season, which is
right.
obviously not happening. But
But could he by the end of
emotionally,
his career?
yeah,
Oh,
by
yeah.
next season, if he stays healthy, very,
Yeah.
very possible. And emotionally, that has got to be, uh, it's got to have extra meaning for Sidney Crosby.
Oh, yeah, because we know that Lemieux was his, mentor,
Yeah.
when he was a rookie. And, it's, yeah, it's a really interesting thing when, the Penguins go from sort of the house that Mario built to the house that Sidney built,
Right.
right? In sort of a hockey generation. And so to see like Lemieux like hovering above him in that list is a real interesting thing to watch.
It is. And, Crosby, like we said, he just keeps on going and playing at that very high level. As for the Penguins themselves, they're one of those teams that is stuck in the very tight battle for some of those, wild card spots in the Eastern Conference. And, they're tied with Columbus right now, but Pittsburgh has played one more game. And you sort of look at the wild card standings, and, Boston has 45 points, and last place Buffalo, who's 16th in the conference, is only 8 points behind them and has 2 games in hand.
Yeah, it's absolutely bonkers. And so I think, like we were talking about earlier, that the schedule balance tends to favor more in division and in conference games for the second half of the season. I think by Four Nations, we're going to have a real more like much more of a clear picture of how this wild card race is going to turn out.
Yeah, and yet, to complicate matters, and I've already found this as one of the, I'm following and covering one of the teams that is in this muddy middle mess. Uh, I'm rooting against overtime. It's like I
Yeah.
almost don't care who wins these games. I just don't want them to go to overtime. And I don't think that's the way fans should be rooting. I just want some consistency in the number of points available in a game. It bothers me.
Yeah. Well, Sidney Crosby might have something to say about that in terms of when and where he scores goals. But I think teams want to win any way they can. But again, as the Pens face more in division rivals, I think, they're going to want to win in regulation for
Yeah,
sure.
it does make a difference. Those loser points uh, add up, and yet when two of the other teams who are fighting for playoff positioning go to overtime or a shootout, both teams get points, and your team is like, it almost doesn't matter which team wins. It's not good.
That is often the case.
Oh boy. So yeah, it gets a little complicated. But hey, thank you for making Locked On NHL your first listen today. For your second listen, find Locked On Fantasy Hockey. Become a fantasy hockey expert and get the edge over your league mates with daily tips from our hosts, Steele and Flip. Find Locked On Fantasy Hockey on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. It's part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Have a great weekend, everybody. Stay safe. Don't forget, I will be back on Monday talking to 3 of our local hosts about the biggest stories from around the NHL. And yes, we have our new Saturday show focusing on women's hockey with Erica El Ayala and you, Rachel. So make sure you check that out as well. Take care, everybody, and thanks for listening to and watching the Locked On NHL podcast.